Hi everyone, welcome back to our Expert Talk series with Everything AD. Today we're thrilled to feature Dr. Yian Gu, who is an Associate Professor of Neurological Sciences at Columbia University Medical Center. Dr. Gu's research explores how lifestyle factors such as diet, physical activity, and sleep shape brain aging, cognitive health, and neurodegenerative diseases. Her work has been recognized with multiple honors from NIH's National Institute on Aging. So we're very grateful to have her here share her expertise with us. So let's get started.
In some patients, maybe not all patients. So we are still, like, the field is still working very hard to develop new medicines to treat the disease. So for all these reasons, it's apparently very important for us to prevent the disease. So how common is the disease? It's very common in older adults. As you can also mention in the video, just to show, there are more than 7 million Americans currently living with the disease, and the number is going to jump to a lot more by the year 2050. If there's no more, no new treatment available, no prevention available, then the number of patients will increase dramatically. And currently, about 1 in 9 people aged 65 or older has Alzheimer's disease. So that is kind of common, but we know that age is the most important risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. As you can see here, the 3 bars. So we divided the population of 65 and older into 3 groups based on the age. Among those people with 65 and 74 years old, the number of patients among all the patients, all the individuals of that age group is about 1 among 20. And then for 75 to 84 years old, among 1 among 8 people will have the disease. And then 85 and older, the number is even higher. The percentage is even higher. It's about 1/3 or so. So the disease is about the aging population. Age is the most important risk factor. So I think this is just to give us the messages, not to scare us, but to let us know the urgency of developing prevention. And so as we already just mentioned a little bit, there are some risk factors we are born with, but the hope is that we still have a lot of the risk factors that we can control. So what are the risk factors that we are born with? The genetics, the age, and some certain level of family history. So genetics such as ApoE gene is the most important genetic risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. So just to give you a very broad idea of what has been known about the genetics for Alzheimer's disease, people probably will ask, is Alzheimer's disease kind of inherited from parents? So I would say partially. For some people, maybe that's the reason. So here this slide showing you most of the genetic risk factors we have identified over the past decade or 2 decades. So here along the horizontal line is how common is the genetic risk factors. So as you can see over on the right side, these genetic risk factors are more commonly seen in population. So they're not rare. So but on the left side of these are very rare genes. You rarely see these in populations. So on top of these 3 are actually the genetic risk factors for the early onset Alzheimer's disease I mentioned earlier. So and then if you go up, then the risk is higher. That means if you carry this gene, the probability of getting Alzheimer's disease in your lifetime is higher. So as you can see, kind of luckily that most common genetic risk factors are not the highest risk factors. However, the ApoE, as I mentioned earlier, ApoE is the combination of a little bit common and also a little bit high risk. So a lot of times we focus on ApoE, maybe some genetic counseling will also test the ApoE gene for people. That's just one thing, but it doesn't determine whether a person will definitely get the disease or not. It just increase the disease. However, let's talk about the more positive side of the risk factors. So we know that some genetic factors, something are not going to be changed. But there's still a lot of things that we can control. We can influence our risks of getting disease or not. So based on this landmark study, 45% of all dementia patients actually can be potentially like prevented through these modifiable risk factors throughout the lifetime. So in early life, less education is a risk factor. In midlife, that's the key part of the risk factors. A lot of things happen during the midlife that can influence the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease in the late life. So, for example, some cardiovascular risk factors like high cholesterol, obesity, hypertension, diabetes, and the low physical activities. All these can be risk factor for dementia. Of course, late life, there are also certain things that can increase the risk. Anyway, so the overall picture here is that there are so many things that in the life, like in our life, that we can potentially influence or change to modify our risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. We can work on this, try to reduce our risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. And this is another way to look at these modifiable risk factors. And as you can see, unhealthy diet, I would say, is one of the most important risk factor. The reason is that we all eat food every day. It's our own control, right? So we can control our diet. And it's actually many of these other risk factors are actually modifiable through changing our diet. For example, obesity, diabetes, certain cardiovascular diseases, hypertension, those are all highly linked with diet. So unhealthy diet is not just by itself, it's related with many of these. And then early life risk factors such as low education, alcohol use, and other things, those are all related with unhealthy diet because of low health literacy or other reasons. So that means that to start with, like focusing on how to prevent Alzheimer's disease, we can start from diet. And so next, I'm going to just show you the literature, like the evidence so far from the research, like which foods are linked to better cognition, what can we eat, what should we eat. So here is a review paper, which is just to summarize a lot of studies in the so far that kind of look at the relationship of diet, nutrients in relation to cognitive decline or Alzheimer's disease. So each dot here shows one study, and these studies are all longitudinal study, means that the study look at the people's diet and see whether they will develop dementia or not. So it's and there are also some clinical trials of these nutrients or food items. So the green dot means that the study found a significant beneficial association of this nutrient and cognition or lower risk of Alzheimer's disease. And the yellow dot means that the study did not find anything. There's no relationship of the diet or nutrient with the Alzheimer's disease. The red dot means that the study actually found an opposite direction, which means that, for example, the vitamin B12 higher intake will lead to a faster decline in cognition. So as you can see, over all these years, there have been numerous studies look at the different nutrients, different food items in relation to cognitive decline. And in general, I think there have been some evidence showing that B vitamins, antioxidants, vegetables, fruits are beneficial overall. And also vitamin D and some unsaturated fatty acids, which we call good fatty acids, like those fatty acids from nuts, from fish, rather than butter, margarine, or like full fat dairy, or those are beneficial. So like unsaturated fatty, good fatty acids are beneficial. And then moderate alcohol intake. Like a heavy drink is not good. Do not drinking any alcohol probably is not also as good as intake a little bit of alcohol. And the fish and the seafood. So all these items, like food items or nutrients, have been consistently tested in the studies and have been shown to be beneficial. And in addition to each individual nutrients or food items, a lot of studies also start to look at the dietary pattern, which is our food combinations, because we know we are not eating individual food or individual nutrients. We are eating a full meal. Like throughout the day, we have our dietary patterns. Throughout the year, our dietary habits tend to be either you eat a lot of meat or some people may be vegetarian. So there will be some patterns throughout the over the years, and someone's diet most likely will be relatively stable, have some preference about eating certain foods. So we looked at that dietary habit or dietary pattern, and we developed a certain dietary pattern analysis scores, and we found that a lot of these healthy dietary patterns are also beneficial for cognition. Here it's a busy slide. I just want to show you the most commonly studied and probably the dietary patterns you have been hearing from the news and the newspapers. So one is called the DASH diet, which was developed actually to prevent hypertension. And then the other one is the Mediterranean diet. And the third one is a combination of these two called the MIND diet. And as you can see here, I listed all these different components of each dietary pattern. And so basically, across the board, you can see they are very similar. Indeed, they are very similar. In our population, we calculate all these three scores, and the correlation are quite strong. So basically, people who have higher DASH diet score will also have higher MEDIT score, have higher MIND score, because of the similarity of these components in the dietary pattern, as you can see here. Of course, each diet has their unique kind of component. For example, DASH diet, because of its focus on hypertension prevention, it emphasizes on like a lower sodium intake, right? And then Mediterranean diet, developed from Mediterranean countries, olive oil is a key component. And then MIND diet is really based on the past literature, past evidence, and it emphasizes about dark green leafy vegetables and berries because of the high antioxidants. So all these common dietary patterns are all beneficial for cognition, as a recent review paper suggested. So the HR means risk for Alzheimer's disease. A value of less than 1 means it's a protection. So you don't have to know this, but it's just a very scientific, strong evidence showing that all these three dietary patterns are related with lower risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And then the take-home message is that these dietary patterns and also the individual nutrients for the items I showed earlier are not very surprising to us, right? So it's all like the high intake of vegetables, high intake of fruits, high intake of fish, low intake of like a red meat, processed meat, and low intake of sweets, sugary beverage, and also like should focus on the whole grain rather than high refined grains. So nothing is very surprising, but it's just like we need to remember this. Sometimes people say what's good for your heart is also good for your brain. In general, I think the general rule applies here for Alzheimer's disease prevention. Of course, I think there is a slight difference across different dietary patterns for different disease endpoints. So if you like really want to like focus on preventing Alzheimer's disease and preserve your cognition, and you probably will like need to focus on a little bit more about the intake of omega-3 fatty acids and take a lot of berries, fruits, vegetables, those kind of things. And I believe most of you probably also are aware of the new dietary guidelines for Americans that came out earlier this year. So in these numbers showing like a suggestion from that guideline. So basically, all these items or food groups are also inconsistent with the guideline. So again, nothing special, like nothing surprising here, but we just need to remember we need to eat a balanced diet and like try to increase our intake of the healthy food items, try to limit our intake of those bad food. That's just the general rule. And I think another question to ask is that a lot of the studies or like evidence I showed so far are based on observational studies, which means that we just ask people what they eat, and then we measure their cognition. We see whether they develop dementia or not. It's not that what you heard for example for medication or certain drug in clinical trials, you give two group of people, one give them drug, one give them placebo, and see whether they have like a better outcomes. So observational studies give you strong usually have many more participants for the studies, and the data are like consistently show across different populations, across different studies. It can give us a certain confidence about the results. But the golden standard of any scientific evidence should come from clinical trials. So what has been done so far? What is known so far about diet in relation to Alzheimer's disease prevention from clinical trials? So unfortunately, despite all this strong evidence from those observational studies, there has not been very strong evidence from clinical trials on diet in relation to Alzheimer's disease or cognition. There are multiple reasons for this because diet it has to be like we eat food every day. So the effect of diet on our brain, on our cognition may take years to build up. So usually those clinical trials give people advice on what they should eat, what they shouldn't eat. And that's the first of all, the same. And also the clinical trials, because of the practical issue, they couldn't follow up the participants for 10 years or 20 years. Most of the time, a study will last for 2 years or 3 years. So just 3 years or 2 years probably is not enough to observe the effect of the dietary change that are assigned in the study. So that's one reason for the kind of no strong evidence of the diet protection for cognition. However, over the past few years, people realize that diet may not work by itself. It can work with physical activity, manage your blood pressure, a lot of other lifestyle or medical issue control measures. So a few studies, large scale landmark studies in the past few years have been looking at this combination of different lifestyle factors, including diet, including brain training, do the puzzles and do the exercise and managing blood pressure, combining all these good things together and then see whether when you do all of these good things, it can give you certain benefits for cognition. And the answer is yes. So a larger study, finger study, and a US pointer study, which is the same version of the US version of finger study. Finger study is mainly in Europe. So these two larger studies, clinical trial, which I mentioned earlier is gold standard for evidence, showed that combination of all these healthy lifestyle can help the participants to prevent the cognitive decline compared to the control group. So it shows certain promise for us to promote healthy diet or these healthy lifestyle factors. And also very, very important from these studies showing that the effect can apply to across different age groups, across different background and genetic risk levels. So when people ask you, I have like a ApoE allele, like I have this genetic risk factor, will these things help me? I think at least based on the current evidence, it seems to be yes. So even though you have higher genetic risk, then you still can do a lot of these good things to help you prevent the dementia or at least delay the onset of the disease, right? Another thing is that we need to, again, from the lesson from the Mind Diet trial, we know that all these things may have very small effect. The effect need to accumulate over years and years to give you a good protection. So let's start today, actually, to eat healthy food, do exercise, all these kind of things. It will help you in the future. So how are we doing in terms of timing? So the part 2 of my talk is just to like give you some additional evidence of what has been done to understand why the healthy diet is related with better cognition or lower risk of Alzheimer's disease. So to answer this question, we need to understand the biological mechanisms for the diet to be related with cognition. So what is diet doing? When we eat an apple, what happens in our body? When we eat a fish, what happens? What do we eat? We eat nutrients. We eat a fish, but a fish has a lot of nutrients. Eventually, it will be digested. It will be converted into many, many different nutrients. And those nutrients can do a lot of things. And some are good nutrients, some are bad nutrients. So some are bad molecules. So those things can do things in our body. And what kind of body change that can be related with our nutrients, and then those body changes can lead to the subsequent change in our brain, in our cognition. So one thing to remember is that the disease is a long-term disease. It's a chronic disease. Even though we identify or we diagnose patients at 65 or older, a lot of things have changed in their brain. So for example, the amyloid and tau, those two proteins already changed in the brain, and many other things already changed. But people have certain level of resilience or reserve that even though the change already occurred in the brain, they can still do the puzzles. They can still communicate well. It's only at a certain level that the pathological change has been really, really a lot, and then they do not have enough healthy neurons or certain levels to help them to carry out those cognitive functions. Then clinically, they show the clinical symptoms of cognitive decline, of functional decline. So the good thing about the long preclinical stage is that many of these changes we now can measure either using neuroimaging, like those MRI scanner, or we get their blood sample, we get their spinal fluid samples, and we can do a lot of testing in the lab to see whether they carry certain molecules. Some are inflammatory molecules, some are directly related with the amyloid tau, which are the Alzheimer's disease specific proteins. So the technology now allow us to detect those changes in the brain or in the blood. And now we can see whether our diet can also help prevent those change. And here just showing you all different types of brain imaging modalities or methods we can use to measure our brain. The same brain, we can use different neuroimaging method to measure from different angle to look at the brain. Just like you describe a person, you can describe their height, you can describe their relative rough weight, you can describe their hair color, you can describe their expression, all kinds of things. We can also describe our brain from different angles. We can describe how big is the brain. We can describe the blood in the brain, right? So, and we can describe how the brain kind of communicate with each other. And we can also use certain molecules to tell us, are there a lot of amyloid or tau already in the brain? Because healthy people shouldn't have those abnormal proteins. So all these things can be measured in the brain. So in one of our previous studies, we look at the relationship of Mediterranean diet with the brain size. Very simple. How big is your brain? Is your brain has some atrophy or not? So atrophy means that the brain shrink over time in old people. So the light blue bar here shows those people with the highest intake of the Mediterranean diet. The dark blue bar shows those people with the lowest intake of Mediterranean diet. As you can see, those people who have the highest level of adhering to the Mediterranean diet, their brain size is bigger. Remember, all these people in our study are cognitively normal old adults. They do not have cognitive impairment. Their cognition is fine. They do not have dementia. They participated in the study. They completed all the tests. They are fine. But we found those people have higher intake of Mediterranean diet. Their brain size is larger. And this, I believe, is among 600 people. And then another study found longitudinally, that means over time, those people who have a higher mind diet score, they accumulate, their brain shrink less. So our study here is we call cross-sectional study, which means at one time point, we just get their diet information, we get their brain information, we just see whether those people with high diet have a larger brain. Yes, it is. And that's not enough. We also need to know whether those people with high diet, they over time, after a few years, whether their brain is really maintain the size, while those people who have lower diet score, their brain shrink more. And the answer is also yes in this study. So all this information tell us, yes, even in old adults, diet is very important for our brain health. And then we also just give you another example of how we look at the effect of diet on Alzheimer's disease pathological change. So remember this graph I showed earlier, the two proteins that become abnormal in AD patients. So we can actually view those amyloid in the brain using neuroimaging. And in this study, we follow up participants and see whether they accumulate more amyloid in the brain over 3 years. And we found that those people who have higher Mediterranean diet score, those people whose diet are closer to the Mediterranean diet type, they're over 3 years, they accumulate that they have less accumulation of amyloid in their brain. All these are old adults, all these are cognitively normal old adults. So this is another example that diet is related with not only the structural, the brain size, but also actively accumulate less these bad things in the brain. Just one last example of what we can do to understand how diet is related with all these kind of changes occurring in our body. So over the past 5 years or 10 years, there have been a lot of development in terms of like measuring the amyloid and tau, again, these two major proteins for Alzheimer's disease in our blood. So in the past, many years ago, we didn't have this method. So we had to rely on the neuroimaging. We had to rely on the other methods to test whether a person has a high level of these these bad proteins. But over the past years, like a very sensitive, very accurate blood tests have been developed in the field. And this is really revolutionary, I would say. So actually, FDA has approved one test to detect the amyloid in the blood. And that test can tell you how high is the molecule in your body, even though someone has perfectly normal cognition, but if you carry this high level of amyloid in the blood, then something need to be done. You should be monitored more often, that kind of thing. So these biomarkers are very, very important for Alzheimer's disease in the current in the field right now. So we also want to know whether diet can reduce these biomarkers, because if we can show that, that shows that the diet is really working very well, starting to prevent the Alzheimer's disease from the very beginning, right? So because these biomarkers can occur in normal people. However, if they continue to be high level of these molecules, those people will eventually maybe develop dementia or cognitive decline years later. So if you really want to prevent Alzheimer's disease, you really want to prevent from the very beginning, prevent these high level of molecules in the blood. So if we can say a diet can be related with lower level of these molecules, then probably it's very important. So in one of our studies, we look at omega-3 fatty acids. Remember, this is the healthy nutrient, healthy fatty acids. So probably among all the nutrients studied so far, omega-3 fatty acid is the most important nutrient for Alzheimer's disease prevention. So anyway, so we looked at people's omega-3 intake levels, and we also measure their blood amyloid level over 3 visits over time. So this blue is the first time they come into our study. Red, the green is the second time, and the red is the third time. Over this, I believe it's like across 4 or 5 years. So they came in years after years, and we repeatedly measure their blood level of these molecules. We track how they change over time. And as you can see here, those people with the highest intake of omega-3, which is the green bar here, they increased. The molecule increase also among them. However, the level of increase is much lower than those people who have lower intake of omega-3. Look at this red bar. It increases dramatically among those people who had a lower intake of omega-3. Over 3 visits, their level of the amyloid, the pathological protein in their blood, increased a lot. So this kind of information tell us that, okay, so diet is really important, not only for like we show their relationship with not only cognition, Alzheimer's disease risk, but also certain like these early stage brain imaging changes or the molecule changes in the blood. I think that's all for my talk. Hopefully, I can like convince you that our diet is important. These are my disclosures from NIH grants, and thank you for your attention. And
Thank you so much, Dr. Gu. Thanks for the great presentation. Very thorough and lots of information to work from there. So we have a few questions, and I'll definitely remind the audience as we go through the questions, if it inspires more questions, feel free to ask them in the chat, and we will add them to the queue. The first question was early on in the presentation, and somebody wanted to know, can I be considered, or am I early onset AD at 70 years old?
no, I think we define early onset as age 65 or younger. And in the field, I think this is a special definition. Usually it implies that early onset AD is due to genetic risk factors. Late onset is we call sporadic. So there's no single determining kind of reason why the person have the disease. So it's late. So if someone is diagnosed with AD at 70 years old, we will consider that as a late onset. But in terms of like why it is the person is diagnosed with AD, we need to do a thorough evaluation. Yeah.
Thank you. Thinking about the presentation in terms of what you presented for diet, you mentioned the MIND diet, the DASH diet, and the Mediterranean diet. In all three of those, or maybe separate from all three of those, is people who choose for whatever their own reasons the vegan diet. Is being vegan helpful, or are there any risks involved?
So vegan, yes. So that's a great question. Um, I think the idea is to promote a healthy, balanced diet. So vegan diet, of course, it will get a certain score, certain points. If you really calculate these three dietary score, you will definitely get points from eating fruits, vegetables, maybe nuts, maybe certain things. But you probably won't get the point from eating fish, eating other things. So the total score is depending on like a balanced diet, all the elements shown in that table. But I would say it really depends on what you eat, and you probably will get a good enough these three dietary scores because you are adhering to most of these food groups. But there are certain things but I think the vegetarian or vegans, they are all aware about, for example, get a certain supplement like the vitamin B12, because we know B12 is coming from meat. So if you are not eating enough meat, maybe then the B12 is very important for brain. So those kind of things. So I would say vegan diet, it depends on how variety of your diet is. It can be beneficial. Yeah.
I
But
wonder if
I would say that a balanced, a more variety diet is important. Yeah.
staying before I go into the next question, staying with the vegan topic, if it's high in carbs or high in refined sugars, does that fall into the inflammatory aspects of it? Or?
Yes. So again, I think a balanced diet is the key. So you want to eat a lot of beneficial food. But if you also eat a lot of bad food, that's not good. That's not going to help you. You need to eat a lot of beneficial food, but limit your intake of sugar and other things. So we don't want to deprive people of the happiness of eating certain food, right? So we still need to eat a little bit sweets and those kind of things. But it's all about how much. So I think like in the graph in the table, it shows above the median, below the median. So basically, it's like not exactly how much but you need to eat certain level of beneficial food. You need to limit your intake to certain lower level. So that kind of things, yeah.
You mentioned also, just because we're talking about charts and graphs now, if one member in the audience said, if I read the chart correctly, vitamin B12 can show a negative effect. Many with ALS and other neurodegenerative diseases would do a biweekly shot. Could you explain the relationship of B12 with dementia/cognition?
Yes, that's what exactly we mentioned earlier. So B12 is very important um, on the good side for brain health, for cognition. That red dot is just one single study. So we need to look at, again, these are all observational studies. Like we need to look across different studies. We need to accumulate a lot of information to make a conclusion. So that one single study, we need to really carefully look at the design, how many people, the follow-up time, all these details of the study. And overall, I would say vitamin B12 is an important healthy nutrient for brain health. And it's again very important for vegetarians to get the shots. And yeah, that kind, yeah.
Thank you. With everything you've learned and suspect about diet relation to AD, and staying with diet, which comfort food or ingredient is your personal go-to with the least amount of guilt?
Chocolate, I would say that is like actually beneficial. I would prefer like a dark side chocolate. So and I kind of try to avoid as much as possible sugary sweet beverage. Yeah. Everyone can choose their own comfort food.
Right. Can you distinguish between causality and correlation for dietary contributions? You mentioned you have to look at studies and maybe cross studies. So, looking at causality and correlation for dietary contributions to AD, are there simple terms that people can look at it through?
Yes, that's why I showed you slides of the clinical trials. I think although we have done so many different studies in different countries across the world, and we consistently show certain dietary components, nutrients, or food items to be beneficial, we still cannot make a final conclusion about the diet unless we have shown it in clinical trials. That's the causality coming from. So I think however, I think the epidemiological evidence is strong. It comes from like a certain rules, like if you consistently show similar effect across different studies, if you show that this diet has reasonable biological effects or mechanism for the disease, that is also contributing to our confidence of causality. So that's why the later part of my talk is about the biological mechanism we try to find, and many other rules, if that can be evaluated for those association studies. And if we can accumulate enough of this information, we are also more towards establish the causal relationship. But again, causality has to come in from the trials. But in general, I think the current evidence is quite strong. Yeah.
Thank you. And you mentioned a few more questions here. You mentioned supplements. Of course, we talked about B12 now. How should people think about supplements? Are there any you feel are worth considering and any that are overhyped or even potentially risky?
Yeah, so I think a supplement has to be really taken into account in like different situations. I would say that we need to focus on a balanced diet from food. It's a more natural resource of our nutrients. Supplement, I think the evidence is less consistent. So actually many clinical trials, because it's easier to do about the supplement. You can, in the clinical trials, you can give one group of people the supplement, the one group a placebo. So it's actually more that clinical trials have been done for supplements. Much fewer studies have been done for actual diet or food. So, but so far, I think the supplements result are still not consistent. And we also need to remember, as I show in those slides, all these nutrients might be important, not just a single one. One single, like a standing out nutrient that is among all these nutrients might be more important is omega-3, but still, you still need to eat a lot of antioxidants from vegetables, from fruits. So it's not one supplement, one nutrient is probably not enough.
Thank you. Staying on one more diet ingredient question: is tofu a healthy addition to the diet?
Yeah, I think actually that's a very good question. That's actually my kind of like a question that we haven't been able to answer a lot in these studies, because it's typically it's not included a lot in a lot of these observational dietary questionnaire. So we had no way to evaluate the effect of tofu. But considering the nutrients level of tofu, considering its high protein intake, so it can be beneficial, especially if you are vegetarian. Of course, that's one of the major source of the protein, and that's important. So it depends on the individuals. Like if you have choice of fish or tofu, you either eat a lot of fish or you eat a lot of tofu, then maybe fish can give you more like omega-3 and those kind of things. So I guess again, variety of food, balanced food diet is the key.
And in comparing proteins like you just did, or on the topic, I should say more generally on proteins, should breakfast have protein or fruit like a smoothie if going for a healthy daily diet?
I I probably cannot answer that question directly, just because I think there's no study to examine like in breakfast specifically, which one should be eaten. So I would say throughout the whole day, you need to eat this and that, all kinds of things. I think the protein, people think, like in general, protein in the morning can give you a lot of energy and enough protein throughout the day, which will give you a good start of a lot of energy. Fruits and vegetables, that's also important. It's it's just I think at this point, I guess there's no consistent strong evidence to which one should be better. It really depends on your preference. Yeah.
Thank you. Do we know, I'm going to make a change here because
what are the earliest?
One of the areas that you talked a lot about when using imaging, you kind of made a transition into amyloids and tau biology. Are these biologies mostly acting through vascular and metabolic pathways, or how should we be able to connect those dots back to diet and lifestyle?
Okay. Those are very good questions. So yes, we can look at the amyloid tau proteins. Those are specific AD related pathological, like disease related molecules. And then there are also vascular health. There are also inflammatory biomarkers. Those are also very, very important. It's the all these things together, probably explain the whole picture of the disease. So diet, we actually, I didn't show, but we actually also look at the relationship of diet with inflammatory biomarkers, and we saw that diet is related with lower level of pro-inflammatory biomarkers. So that's an active research I'm working now. So yeah, I guess we still are not clear about exactly which pathway is diet working towards AD prevention, but I believe it could be multiple pathways because of all these different nutrients may act through different pathways. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there subgroups of people based on ApoE4 status, diabetes, vascular disease, sex, or age? As you were mentioning, like for
Yes.
benefit more from particular lifestyle changes within this grouping of lifestyle changes that you talked about?
Okay, so that's a great question. That's actually is one of the area we are focusing on. We really try to understand whether those people who have baseline high risk, what kind of things can help them to prevent the disease, right? So those people with ApoE carry the ApoE4 allele, they are at a higher risk. We know that, but like, can we help them to prevent the disease? Can we identify certain things in our life to help them, like either healthy diet or more activities? So that's very important for them. Also, those people with high cardiovascular risk, like with diabetes, with high hypertension. So I think that's a very, very important question to ask. So far, I guess research always want to answer that question. Like in our studies, we try to see whether the effect is the same across different people or there is like a stronger relationship of diet with the disease among ApoE carriers. So basically, like we have seen both. So we have seen certain diet with related with the disease more in ApoE non-carriers, like no ApoE4 risks. And we rarely see ApoE4 carriers have identified certain factors that only specific for ApoE4 carriers. But that's not because of, probably that's not only because the effect is not there, but most likely it's because there are much fewer people in our study with ApoE4 carriers, which in the statistical level, we couldn't detect any effect size. That's probably one of the reasons. So I guess in the future, we plan to do larger sample size studies. We want to do a much more better designed studies, like really try to understand or develop certain factors, certain lifestyle things that we can do to help those people with high risk. That's a very important question.
Yeah. What would you actually, what is one thing you wish people understood was a myth, or what are the biggest myths you hear from patients about diet, Alzheimer's, and brain health? That's something that as people are talking to their physicians, talking to the families, talking to their loved ones, separating fact from myth is so important about diet and lifestyle.
I don't have a direct answer to that because I guess most likely because all these what we talked so far are all like as I mentioned earlier, a common kind of also healthy diet for cardiovascular diseases, for cancer prevention. So maybe the message has been there for many people, like fruits, vegetables, those are the good things. I think one myth is probably what you mentioned earlier. Like some people may think, oh, this supplement is good for your health, so I will take a lot of this pill. It's easy. I can still eat a lot of junk food, so I can still be protected. So I think that is not correct. So yeah.
I think we'll wrap it up with just a couple more questions. How much exercise is enough to make a difference, especially for older people or older adults or people who are not currently active, and or how much change to diet is enough? How dramatic a change do you think you need to see from people who are maybe later on when they have potential onset?
I would be very frank, I don't have the answer now. I think it's mainly because a lot of studies have been focusing on preclinical, how we can prevent Alzheimer's disease. Very few studies have been done actually in Alzheimer's disease patients. We had a study about 10 years ago to look at the diet intake of alcohol in relation to cognitive decline among Alzheimer's disease patients only. So we found those people who can drink a moderate level of wine specifically had a slower decline in cognitive in cognition among all Alzheimer's disease patients. But I feel very compared to how many studies have been done in preclinical before the onset of disease, very, very few studies have been done in Alzheimer's disease patients. So I do not have a direct answer to say this diet will help you in Alzheimer's disease patients, but I would say these, in general, all this research on before the diagnosis of disease, the preclinical stage disease, how to prevent Alzheimer's disease, all this information might carry. At least I don't think it will give you hurt to follow these healthy dietary patterns. In terms of the physical activity, that's another research area I have been focusing on. It's actually, we do think in older adults, even light physical activity is protective. The guidelines, the US guideline for physical activity is 150 minutes 2 weeks for moderate and high intensive, physical activity. But from our study, we show that even light physical activity, just walking, gardening, and those small little things, as long as you are moving around. So light physical activity can still give you protection. So I think that's very important message because seniors, like old adults, certain times, sometimes they may not be able to run marathon, of course, run a lot of more a very strong activities. So I think even light physical activity is protective is an important message.
Thank you. One final question for you, and we can't forget about our caregivers who do so much. For caregivers listening or watching this, what lifestyle advice applies to them as well?
Yes, I think the caregivers, I think first of all, I think it's a important research area we look at. So I think the physical, the mental burden for caregivers are very strong, are heavy. So I think it's also important for them to keep a very balanced and healthy diet because we know those healthy diet is also protective against a lot of other things like depression, cardiovascular diseases. So if you are talking about, if I understand your question correctly, if you are talking about the caregiver's health, so I think the healthy diet patterns are also applied to them.
Well, and so much of protecting the lifestyles of people in their home falls on them as well, making the right diet choices for two people potentially.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Gu. It's been a pleasure having you. I will remind everybody too that this is part of an ongoing program from the Alzheimer's Disease Research Initiative, the ADRI, which is part of EverythingAD.org. You can learn more about that study and the prevention and monitoring study that it represents at EverythingAD.org. Dr. Gu, again, thank you so much for the presentation today, for all the work you're doing to understand how we can better protect our brains, protect our lifestyles, protect our loved ones. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
I'll hand it back to McFinn.
Thank you. Bye.
Folks, look what we got to hear today. Dear, you have made a change. Oh, you disappeared. Well, I just want to say we're each making a change in each other's lives by coming together and asking questions that other people might not think about because we're all on the same circle. And so your participation is more beneficial than you realize because the more people who come to these presentations, the more information is spread, and health is our wealth. And so let's be as wealthy as possible and take care of each other because this is a journey, and your journey can be supported by Everything AD. So folks, come, be educated, and share what you hear. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thank
one
you.
last comment. Pete Patel, you are an angel on earth. I am so proud of you, Pete. Thank you for being here. Yes, ma'am. Your beautiful husband. What a gentleman. And I'll leave it at that.
Thanks to everybody else joining us today, whether you were able to be with us on camera or not. We see you. We're doing this with you and for you, and for all your families. So if you have any questions, if you just want to get to know members of the community, by all means, you can write to us at info@everythingad.org. We're here as a community with you, not only to provide the educational programs, but to help you on your journey. So
Thank you for being with us, Judy and Robes
yep.
and Peggy
You're welcome.
and
Brian.
Mary. Not, oh boy, I'll just say you have beautiful cabinets in your house, dear. All right, folks.
Thank you.
Judy, thank you for
I'm
being here.
I'm at PT with my son that has ALS.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
An angel on
He's
earth.
doing great.
Well, that's because he's got some inspiration from you and your smile.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Until
joining.
a new day.
That's right. Bye till then.